Well, welcome to Exploring Options for Creating Online Simulations. I'm Jeremy Merritt with IC Systems, and I have Michael here. Maybe you could introduce yourself.
Sure, this is Michael Bean from Forio Business Simulations.
And this is a joint webinar between IC Systems and Forio today. And I'll just do a quick overview of what we're going to cover today, and then we'll get into it. The first thing is Michael is going to answer the question, what is Forio Simulate? For those of you who aren't familiar with the platform or want to learn more about it and maybe discover some more things. Part two, we'll publish a iThink model to Forio Simulate using isee NetSim, so we'll walk through that process. Part three, we'll get into some more advanced features of Simulate. We'll actually show you how you can protect your simulation, and then we're going to save the last 10 minutes for question and answer. So we have about 30 minutes to get through the content, 10 minutes for question and answer. So that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Michael to tell us about Forio Simulate.
All right, terrific. So this is Michael Bean from Forio, and I think the way to start with what is Forio Simulate is to answer the question, who are Forio? And we've been in partnership with IC Systems now for 3 years, and we're focused on providing hosting on the web. So we have worked with IC Systems to basically host simulations or NetSims that are developed using STELLA or iThink. And we've been around since 2001. And all we do is host simulations on the web, so we're completely focused on that. In addition to some of the sims I'm going to show you in a minute, Jeremy asked me when we were practicing this earlier to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done with with other clients to give a flavor for it, sort of the more, say, some of the higher end hosting and things like that. And one of our biggest clients has been Harvard Publishing, and I realized yesterday, Jeremy, that if you just go to hbsp.harvard.edu, you'll see on the main page that they have teaching with simulations, which is great, I think, for the system dynamics field in general. I mean, it's just nice to see that. And there's a whole set of simulations here. Actually, all of these simulations are sims that we've collaborated with Harvard on in terms of developing, and we're also hosting them for them. So we kind of manage the hosting as well as even their e-commerce. So we do the e-commerce management for them as well. So that's an example, and actually for each one of those, you can click through and actually play the simulation. In addition to doing games, we do things like simulations around planning, typical system dynamic style simulations. This is an energy choice simulation that was done for the Midwestern Governors Association a couple of years ago. But that's not really what I want to show today. Just a little bit of a background on the company. If you go to, and I should make a sort of emphasize this for the future. If you go to forio.com/simulate, you'll get to this showcase page, and this is basically the hosting service that we've partnered with IC Systems on in order to provide iThink and STELLA NetSim-based simulation hosting. And in this set of in forio.com/simulate, you'll see. Well, there's actually at this point there's over 1,200 simulations that are being hosted there, and some of them are very large, elaborate simulations. I'd say most of them actually are smaller sims, as you can probably expect with that number. There's a number of small things, and there's some big things as well that are there. One of the things that's sort of interesting is that, well, first off, there's some for pay simulations that authors have provided are paying for the hosting, and then there's others that are hosted entirely for free. And if you're interested in seeing the free sims, you can click on the Creative Commons License Content checkbox, and then it'll just be limited to showing simulations that are under the Creative Commons license. And what's neat about those is that those are all copyable. Those are sims that you can go back and look at and see how they're put together and things like that, and learn a little bit about how to develop your own web simulation. I thought I'd start today by taking a look at an example web simulation here. I'll just click on the first one here. This is one that was developed by Chris Soderquist, and this is kind of typical of the way these get set up. So what you'll see here is there's an example sort of screenshot, and Jeremy later today is going to show you how to do these kinds of things, but here's a screenshot in the overview page. You can see a little description about the simulation here. And you can see a little bit about the author as well. So here's a little bit about Chris Soderquist and some questions that someone had posed about the simulation. If I click on this, what you can see is the author profile. It's a description of Chris Soderquist's experience with system dynamics modeling. There's even a link to his homepage here, Pontifex Consulting. So that's a typical thing that people do, as well as kind of provide a homepage for sort of orient people around where they come from and what their background is and things. You can see that Chris has created 3 different simulations on Forio Simulate. And just to give you a flavor for one of those, this is a simulation about how much oil is left. He did this during sort of after the BP oil spill. There's a little description of it. Because it is a hosted simulation, or excuse me, a free simulation that's under the Creative Commons license, as I was showing earlier, this sim Chris has made available for download. So I can click here and download the model if I want to, and using STELLA or iThink, take a look at it and see how it was constructed, and you know, it's licensed for me to, so long as I'm willing to attribute Chris's work on it and also share it with others, then I can do other things with it here. So I'm just going to take a look at it inside of the interface here, and you can see it loading up here. And here's the simulation, and this simulation is largely around reserves to production, a calculation that geologists use, and it's basically, you know, a simple stock with an outflow over time. And this simulation allows users to experiment, for example, with, you know, what we think is going to happen to returns as, you know, oil decreases over time, and we can make some other assumptions in there, and then run out the simulation and look at, you know, what the simulation is illustrating in terms of the amount of reserves that exist and the annual production over time and when we're going to run out. So here's what we can see here in these 2 graphs. So that's kind of an example of how that works. And it's a nice example. This sim has been run numerous times. Let's see what it says here. It's 1,380 times. It's one of the powers of having a simulation online, because it's so easily accessible. You know, it can simulations get run thousands of times, and we have some sims that have been run, you know, well over 100,000 times, which I think is a great way. Just illustrates the point of it being a great way to share simulations. And in fact, one other thing that Chris does, which I think is sort of neat, I periodically get emails from him, and I just thought I would illustrate an email that I received from him recently. Let's see if I can find it here. I thought it loaded up before, and now it appears to be gone. I'll have to pull it up later on. Anyway, my point is that what Chris does with these things is put on the footer of his emails links to his simulations. That's all I was going to illustrate. That this little link here with the sim URL appears as just something that he's kind of illustrating some of the things that he's particularly interested in, that he advocates for, or also illustrating some of his capabilities as a system dynamics consultant. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy to continue on and talk a little bit about other ways of how you can upload your simulation using NetSim.
Thanks, Michael. As you can see, Forio Simulate it's a pretty great resource, even if you're not actually building models, because there's a lot of interesting games on there. There's certainly a lot of system dynamics models, but you can actually publish a variety of types of models to simulate, from Excel-based models to models built with iThink and STELLA, models built with VenSim, models built in Forio, right online within Forio Simulate itself. But today what I'm going to do is just demonstrate how easy it is to take a iThink or a STELLA model and publish it onto the resource Forio Simulate that Michael just showed to us. So what I have here is iThink open. I have a model open, and this model is a credit card debt simulation. It's actually developed by Kareem Shashakli, who works here at isee Systems as the Director of Product Development, and he developed this model for a post that he wrote for the isee Systems blog, which everyone should subscribe to. And in that blog post, he actually goes through, it's called Shifting the Burden, and he goes through taking the classic causal loop diagram systems thinking archetype of shifting the burden. He starts there and actually builds a stock and flow model from it, and sets the context as in terms of credit card debt. And this model in particular is looking at what happens when someone's income, which you can see down here, which is $2,000 a month, is less than the spending rate that they're spending each month. In this case, they're spending $3,000 a month. And since this is exploring the shifting the burden archetype, it's looking at what happens when you start attacking the symptoms rather than the root cause of the problem. And that, in this case, you quickly run out of money, so to keep up the spending rate, you end up using credit card, running up some credit card debt. So, here is a stock and flow model sort of presented all at once. We're within iThink on the model layer, which is interesting and I think useful for people who are familiar with modeling. But if you want to actually allow someone to play around with this and experiment with it and gain some insights from it, then you might want to build an interface, and that's what I've done up here on the interface tab. So I'm going to click on the tab interface to go to the interface. And you can see I have a simple control panel here. So now I can actually do something like run the simulation. And what we can see here is that I have a graph, and it's showing different things like the bank balance, the credit card debt, the amount of bills owed, and charges to the credit card. And I have a couple of levers. The first one is I can set the initial amount in my bank account, and then I can set the minimum payment that I'm going to make toward the credit card each month. And in this case, you can see what happens is the bank balance quickly dips, start using the credit card debt quickly ramps up and seems to be increasing over time. So we can try a different strategy and say, well, we should probably increase our minimum monthly payment to the credit card. We can run that scenario again. You can see similar behavior pattern, but eventually we start to drive the credit card debt down. So it appears that we have to attack the we have to use the credit card initially, but overall it's by changing the spending habits that end up helping us out in the long term. And that's all explained in this blog post written by Kareem. And so what I've done is created this control panel, and if you notice down here, I'm on page 2, and you can see these little lines. If I scroll over, I've actually made this interface have a couple of pages. So because I'm thinking about publishing this to Forio Simulate, so if you think about what Chris's simulation looked like, which was actually pretty fancy, a lot of graphics, tabs, and that sort of thing, I'm making a simpler version and thinking about that when people come to the website, they're going to see this page here. And so I've included the causal loop diagram, I've included a title, a very brief description, and I've actually put down a couple of buttons here that I've styled like hyperlinks, so that on the web they'll look like hyperlinks. And the first one, we can actually see the outline because I'm within iThink and I'm authoring the interface. You can see that this is a hyperlink button, and it actually points to the blog article itself. Okay, so that's pretty neat because then someone can click on it and I can sort of connect it back to something else. So in this case, there's an article here where Kareem actually very nicely goes through putting together the model. So I'm going to go back to iThink now and show you that this button here I've actually constructed as a navigation button. So I've instructed it to go to page 2 when I click it. So you click on this, then we're jumped over to page 2. Okay, this one goes back, and this Explore the Model button actually just shows us the model down the model layer using the storytelling feature. So a very simple interface, and now what I want to do is actually publish this to Forio Simulate so others can play with this simulation. So the first thing I need to do is export this model into a format that NetSim can use to get it up online. So I will choose the Export for NetSim option, and I'm going to save the TXM file that it generates, which is different from the iThink model, onto the desktop. So once that's done, I'm going to minimize iThink, get that out of the way, and I'm going to load up isee NetSim Web Publishing Wizard. And this is a simple, easy-to-use wizard that just takes care of all the details of getting the simulation online. The idea behind this is if you want to construct your interface within iThink, then that's a great place to author it, and the wizard's going to take care of all the details of actually publishing that to the web. So this first screen is just a reminder for you to export before you start off, and you can actually check off to skip that page if you get sick of seeing that message each time. So the first thing that we need to do in the wizard is we need to select the location of the TXM file that I just exported. And so I exported that to the desktop, so I'm going to select it. The next thing we need to answer is where will the model be published. In this case, we're going to publish it to Forio Simulate. And then finally, we need to provide some login information. I already have a login, as you can imagine, so I filled in my information here. But if you don't have an account, you can click this link and fill in your information right here within the wizard, and it will create an account for you. Next, I select a publishing mode. We have a preview option, so you can preview your changes before everyone else sees them live on the internet. But in this case, I'm just going to publish the model. And when I choose publish, I can actually choose if I would like to share, if I would like others to be able to download the iThink model file as well. And if I choose to share the model, like Michael was saying, as a Creative Commons licensed model file, then Forio will actually host my simulation for free in that case. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I select, this time you notice the iThink icon here, I'm selecting the iThink model. And that's really the last step. I hit next, and you'll see there's some status messages about uploading the model and completed, and then you'll see it jumped over to my web browser because the wizard, when it was complete, just automatically opens up the web browser. And now I'm in Forio Simulate, as you can see. So the first thing it wants me to do is enter the name of the simulation. It automatically fills it in based on the file name. I'm going to get rid of the spaces here because I don't like, or the underscores. And the next step is I have to select a hosting plan for the simulation. Because I upload the model, I can choose the free plan, which is great. So I'm going to select the free plan. And the last step is to agree to the Forio Terms of Service and to agree to license the simulation under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. And you can learn more about that when you're here if you're not familiar with that license by clicking on this link here, which actually take you to a page that will describe what the rights are under this license. Okay. So I'm going to create my simulation. And now what happens is Forio Simulate, this page might look familiar to what Michael showed you. It brings me into what is referred to as my simulation home page. So I can access an image, a URL, a description. You can see my bio and picture is shown here. I can put a description in. But the first thing I want to do is just actually run the simulation to make sure that everything worked out. See, it loads up in NetSim here, and you can see here's the home page. I'm going to click on Simulate to jump to the control panel. Go ahead and run this. We can see the debt running out of control. We can try playing around with cranking up the minimum monthly payment, seeing that it's coming back down. So that's great. It's all working out. I'm happy with that. And now, since I know that the simulation will appear in the simulation showcase on Simulate, I want to sort of customize my homepage and give a little bit of background information. The first thing that's glaring is this no image provided, so I'm going to upload an image instead. I happen to have the causal loop diagram that I used on the home page here on my desktop, so I'm going to choose that. Okay, that's a lot better. The other thing you can do is you can add a description, which would be great. I'd probably use some text from the blog post or even link to the blog post here as well. And then another interesting feature of Simulate, which is useful for finding resources of other simulations, is that you can actually tag the sims with keywords. So in this case, I could tag it with debt, credit. I think you separate tags with a comma. So click Add Tags. And what this does is now I can actually click on the det tag, for example. It'll bring up any sims that are tagged with this keyword. You can see there's another sim, housing supply and demand simulation. So those are the basic steps for getting a model up. As you can imagine, from there you can fill in description and start to get ratings and start to promote your model like we saw Chris doing earlier. So at this point, I think what I'm going to do is switch back to Michael, and he can move on to the next part, which is protecting your simulation.
That sounds great. Thanks, Jeremy. What I thought I could do too, just as a step, one of the things I wanted to illustrate earlier on, and I think may be useful, is just from the last step. As Jeremy was explaining, this simulation is hosted and is part of a blog post. And I just thought it might be interesting just to quickly take a look at how that was done. And this is the sim that Jeremy just uploaded right here. You can see over here there's something called embed link. If I click on that, I have the ability to just copy the link, which shows where it is, and I could use this, for example, in a if I wanted to include this in an email or something like that. But also kind of interesting here is this ability to embed it as a Flash object in, say, a blog, in the same way, essentially, that you upload or connect a YouTube video. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And if I go here to, I have this sort of Blogger account set up that I only use for demos, so it doesn't have any real blog posts in it. But just as an example of how that would work, then I can go in here and I can just paste this sort of this text or this object tag in here, and then I could around it I could type some real stuff around. This is my post about credit card debt or something. And publish it, and now what you'll see is independent of the of Simulate, this simulation exists. This is now sitting inside of my blog post, and it's just a completely separate piece. There's none of the Forio stuff up here. So in addition to having things that are hosted on the Forio site, you can have things in a blog post or elsewhere. And again, because this particular simulation was posted with the Creative Commons license, this little bar appears on the bottom here, and you can do things like make a comment about the simulation. You can embed it yourself, or this is actually share it on Facebook or Twitter. You can also do things like embed it yourself in another place, so kind of get it to be used elsewhere and things like that. So we've talked a lot so far about this free version and the Creative Commons license piece, but there are a lot of people that either can't or don't want to share their models with others. So they don't want, in the sense that they don't want the model to be shared. It's something that is proprietary to either a client or to a company or to some other organization. There may be something that's being used for a class, for example, and you want students to log into the simulation in order to access it for a class. So in the sort of non-free versions of this, there's options for having a protected simulation, and we thought it would be useful to show you that as well. So what we've done is we've created the same version of Jeremy's simulation, except for now, instead of being under the Creative Commons license, this one is in, I think, yeah, here it is, the Simulate Basic account. So I set this one up yesterday with Jeremy, and we have this set up as a protected simulation. And when you have a protected simulation, there's a few additional features that you get in terms of user access that don't appear in the free version. So one of the key ones is that the simulation, you can still choose if you wanted to have it run without a subscription, which means without users logging into it. But in this case, what we want to do is say that users must subscribe to the simulation in order to have access. And there's a few other things here too around, should the sim be available to be found in the showcase? Sometimes people don't even want that. They don't want to have any visibility to the sim, and there's actually a numerous number of simulations on the Simulate site that are set up that way. They're essentially invisible, that people want to hold privately. So this one is still visible in the sense that if you go on after this talk today and want to find it, you'll be able to find it, but it will require a login. So we set this up so it requires a login today. Then let's say you have a class, and you have a class of students, and you want them to be able to run the simulation. They're going to need to be able to log into it. The way that you do that is you go to a new tab that didn't exist in the free version called User Access. I'm clicking on the User Access tab, and the first step is to create a group. And group is kind of a generic name for a class or some kind of work group or something. So in some cases, for example, a simulation might be used by different companies around around the U.S. or something, and in those cases, then each one of them could have their own group, and they would only be able to share information among themselves. But similarly, say at a university, you might want to, or even a high school, you might want to create a group so that everybody, an entire class of students, is available to kind of work together within a group. So I'm going to add that. I'm going to call this class 123. So I've created a new group now, and you can see that class 123 appears up here on my list, and you can see that I have this sort of setting here for it, but unfortunately I have no students in my class yet. So there's a number of ways that I can add students. I can either do it one by one. I can search for people that are already in the system and add them if I want to through this. But a more common way to do it is to import users as a group, as a list of students, for example. And the way to do that is you can download an Excel template from here. So you just kind of click on that, and I can open up this Excel template. Oh. Well, what I did was the Excel template I had will look just like this except be blank, but I filled this one in advance to move things along for today. So this is what the Excel template looks like when you download it, except for this material in here. And what you can see is there's I just put in the email address of the students. That's a requirement because that's what kind of creates the account name for the students. And then I enter their first and last name. And if I want to, I can provide them with a username. The username needs to be different for each student. So if I don't fill that in, then their username will be their email address. And then lastly, if I want to too, I can specify the password. Now, if I don't specify the password, the system will generate a password for them, which they can change later on if they want to. And that way, the faculty or the administrator won't have access to the student's password, and they'll just have that privately. So I'm not going to fill any of those. I'll let the Forio Simulate generate the password for them in this case. And because I had saved this earlier, this roster, I'm going to go back here and browse on my desktop for the roster file. There it is. I'm going to open it up and then hit upload. And now what I can see is the number of the students that have been uploaded into the system here. So I've got a successful one. The person here was here before. This Bill Papatosis, and a number of them were generated. I made a couple of mistakes. You notice that I included a little symbol that isn't actually allowed in email, and so it's flagging those as invalid email addresses. Those aren't valid email addresses here. This one had a space in it, so I could go back and correct those, make sure that everybody gets in. And then on the bottom here, I have this option that says email new users with their Simulate account details. So I have that option too. And what I can do is if I click Add to Roster here for this with the email, then all these people will get emails that says, here's your new account information, here's how to log in, etc., to get access to this particular simulation. But since these are all fake emails, I'm going to skip that and just generate here. And now I can see all the students that have been added to my class here. And just to illustrate how that works then, I'm going to switch browsers. And, well, actually, my first step is, let me go back here for a second. I want to get the URL that I'm going to use here. So I'm going to go here and just copy the URL from the overview page. And now I'm in just, I'm a regular browser here, and I'm going to just go to the simulation. Oh, you know what? I'm already logged in on this account. All right, let me try something here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is log out over here to make sure that I am so I have a free access here. Let's see. What I had done before the event today was to go to the simulation and test it, and I was logged in then, and so I was logged in again. So anyway, in this case now I'm at the login page, because in this browser I haven't yet logged into the simulation from earlier, so a few minutes before, so I apologize for that mistake there. But if I had been logging in for the first time, it would say you need to sign in to proceed, and I'll go back then and find the name of one of the students that I have in my class that I had created an account for earlier. In this case, it's Bill. I'm going to go ahead and enter his username as the username here, and I can remember what his password was, and I hit sign in, and then I have access to a simulation. So that's sort of the sequence that one goes through in order to protect these simulations and make them available only for students. And what would happen here, if you do nothing, if you make no action within the simulation, then it'll time out after about 10 minutes or so, and then it'll require some additional login. Okay, I'm going to pass control back over to Jeremy here for wrapping things up.
Thanks, Michael. That was great. I've just put up the contact information on the screen for us all to gaze at while we go through some quick question and answer. So if you have any questions, we've got a few queued up. Please go ahead and enter them now, and I'm going to read them, and we'll try to answer them, and anything we don't get to, we'll try to follow up and email everyone with answers after the webinar ends. So I'm going to proceed, and the first question, which I think would be great for you to answer, Michael, is NetSim needed to publish on Forio? Can we publish STELLA models directly?
Yeah, you can publish. That's one of the things that I think. Yes, you can publish STELLA models directly. It's a different bit of procedure. It's a little bit more difficult than publishing through NetSim. There's some steps involved, because what you're doing is you're actually uploading the equations view instead, but there's a procedure for doing so that will allow you to upload directly. And either procedure will work, and I think that there's pluses and minuses to either approach. The big advantage to using the NetSim approach is that you get access to a lot of the built-in NetSim tools in the user interface that you wouldn't get otherwise. And I guess the second big advantage, in my opinion, Jeremy, you may have others that you can think of, is that that it's much easier. That the user interface that you've created is exactly duplicated inside of the NetSim model.
Right. Yeah, I would agree that it's definitely the path with NetSim is for ease of use. So you don't have to muck around with HTML or anything. But we do have plenty of customers who want to develop more sophisticated interfaces, and so that involves actually just exporting the equations of the STELLA model, uploading them, and then designing an interface within Forio Simulate itself. And so that's certainly possible, and that allows you to do some things that you can't do in iThink and STELLA. So I think they're complementary. More effort, but maybe more features in one, and less effort, but ease of use in the other. So exactly. In the end, they end up in Simulate mixed together. There's a few other questions that are related. I think I'm going to try to just group this together. People are saying, does any way I can use this tool with models made in other software? Someone asked, do you support VenSim? So Michael, maybe you want to just address that very quickly, and we can move on.
Yeah, you bet. So as I said at the beginning here, is all we do is host simulations on the web, and our mission as a company is to host system dynamics models and other kinds of models as well, actually. We're expanding this year into hosting, for example, discrete simulations. The sort of belief that Forio has is that there's this huge power in simulations, but one of the missing link in sort of spreading the ability for people to use simulations effectively and productively is ease of use, and essentially not requiring people to install things on their to desktop in order to have access to them. So we do have a variety of tools that Forio works with, and that we host for, and VenSim is one of them, as well as other tools like AnyLogic, which is coming out shortly. And this year, as I mentioned, we're moving into some other tools as well, other kinds of non-system dynamics tools to kind of expand it now that we've more or less covered the ground that we could cover within the system dynamics field. So we're going to be expanding that as well.
Great. We have another question. Are all STELLA graph formats supported through NetSim, e.g. scatter plots? Actually, we don't support the scatter plot at this point, but we do support the bar graph and the line graph. NetSim, if you go to the if you go to our homepage and you go to the isee NetSim page, there's an extensive list of what's supported and what's not. We're working we're working toward having everything be supported, but not everything is at this point. Some things don't translate properly to a runtime on the web.
One thing that there is an option for, I should mention, since we talked a moment ago about this sort of alternative import option, is that the UI designer that is part of Simulate does support scatter graphs as well as sort of what I would call the Hans Rosling style gapminder bubble charts. That's sort of a version of that, those animated charts and things like that. So if that's a requirement for something, there's a path that you can get to from that. For that, although, as I was mentioning earlier, it's a slightly more, or moderately, I should say, more complex path for uploading a simulation.
Right. Okay, we probably have time for a couple more questions. Here's one. Does the client need to have STELLA or iThink to get access to the models? And the answer is no, they don't. On the Download Model tab that Michael was demoing, you download a zip archive that actually contains the model and any resources like images and sounds, etc. But that page has a link to the free isee player. So they can actually link off to the isee player and open the model that way. So they don't have to have iThink or STELLA. If they do have iThink or STELLA and they have NetSim, then they could actually make some modifications to the model and republish it in their own account. Okay. Okay, last question here. Can you talk about infrastructure backend on Forio server?
Sure. Let's see. What can I say about it? I'm not the most technical person in our organization. I'm possibly the least technical person, but I can tell you a little bit about the server configurations, things like that. This is hosted on a cluster of servers. There's I don't remember exactly how many now, but something like 14 servers in Houston, I think, and we're using a mixture of mostly Linux, but some Windows servers as well, and they're running as Java web applications. So it's a server-side Java web application that's actually providing the server, the servers that are running them. And let's see, what else can I talk about in terms of technology and things? There's a number of tests they've done on in terms of security and things like that. We've actually worked with banks and some other organizations, some government organizations and things where they've done some elaborate tests to make sure that the system is secure, and we've been able to pass those. So, but beyond that, if you have other technical details, feel free to email me and I'll forward them to the appropriate person.
Okay, and that's about all we have time for today, and we'll try to, any remaining questions, we'll follow up with email responses to the group, and we'll also post a link to the recording when we get that up online. So I just want to thank everyone for attending today, and thank you very much, Michael, for doing this.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. I really enjoyed doing this with you today.
Okay, great. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.